For the next few weeks, we'll be talking about the book of Daniel. So here's a little backstory. Daniel and his fellow Israelites were conquered and captured by the Babylonians. The Babylonian king decided to make them serve in his palace, but wanted them to give up their faith and act like Babylonians. Daniel and his friends refused, and the king ended up respecting them more for it. Then the king told Daniel's friends that they had to worship his god, a giant statue. Again, they said no, so the king had them thrown into a fiery furnace. But God joined them in the furnace and saved them. When the king saw this miracle, he recognized their God as the one true God. Later, God used Daniel's dream to tell the king to humble himself. When he refused, the king lost his mind. Eventually, he humbled himself before God, and when he did, God restored him as king. When a new king came to power, Daniel was told to worship him as God, but once again, he stood firm. So the king had him thrown into a pit with hungry lions, but God shut the lions' mouths and rescued him, forcing the new king to acknowledge Daniel's God too. There is a lot more to this crazy story, but let's dive into the message.
This series, Dilemma, it kind of fits perfectly with what my wife and I are going through right now. About to have our first child. When I originally said yes to speaking this weekend, I didn't realize how close it was to our actual baby's due date. I had no clue that it would be less than 2 weeks before that. So, probably should have looked at dates, but I didn't. And so, I do want to prepare you. If you see a little pregnant woman waddling out of here, I'm probably following her right behind her. I did tell her before these services and stuff today, I said, if you're here, you cannot get up and go to the bathroom or anything. Because if you leave, I think it's time, and I'm following you as well. So if you're sitting next to her, I apologize. Hopefully she can hold it. But guys, hey, my name is Seth Walker. I am the Students and Connections pastor here. I want to just welcome you to Fellowship of the Parks as we continue our series, Dilemma. I do want to encourage you, you can follow along in your listening guide that you got in the program you were handed when you walked in. Also, there's a connection card in there. I want to really encourage you to fill that out. It's not just a way for us to be able to connect with you, but really to pray for you in some of the things that you're going through. Especially in today's message, we're going to be kind of hitting home at some of those dilemmas and the challenges and things that we face, and really what those look like. Today we're talking about being tested. But over the last 2 weeks, we have seen different challenges and different things that we've been faced with. That first week, we really kind of talked about the world culture and how we feel like we are influenced and have to confine to what the world wants us to do with social media and this expectation that we have on us to fit into what the world is asking us to do. But at the same time, we struggle because it doesn't line up with what God wants us to do. It's not a part of his plan, but it seems like it's easier to do what everybody else is asking us to do, which can cause some identity issues. You don't know where you fit in. You don't know where your place is at. You don't necessarily know how you fit in. And you go, man, maybe I need to do this on my own. In reality, we need to find our identity through Christ. Especially on Father's Day last week, talked about how as fathers, we need to stand up for that. We need to set the identity in our families. We need to be those spiritual leaders in our families and encourage the relationship with Christ, not just through our marriage, but through your kids. And today, really, what that kind of leads to is talking about being tested. All those dilemmas and things we face is we're constantly tested. The whole reason we started being tested is the fact that when Eve took the apple from the tree and took a bite from it, sin entered the world, and therefore we were tested. Adam and Eve were tested. They both failed, and a lot of times we fail a lot. But the reason we fail is because we don't always keep our trust and faith in God. Look, I'll be honest with you. I am only 26 years old. I have not been tested as much as most of you that are in this room. My wife and I have only been married for about 2.5 years now. We are not parents yet. We are about to be. So I have not been tested when it comes to parenting. Our marriage hasn't been tested a ton because we haven't had to face some of those huge life challenges when it comes to finances or anything like that. We're still at the point where we can just kind of go do whatever. We don't have to find babysitters and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot easier to communicate when you don't have little people running around. But for my wife and I, we were kind of on the brink of that, where it's like I see these tests, I see these challenges, and all this stuff coming that are so close, but we're just not there yet. And during this, as I was writing it this week, it's like, man, I feel like what I'm talking about is just helping prepare me for the future. For some of you are going through those tests right now and wondering why the struggle is like, what do we do next? What are our next steps? Some of you are in the same boat we are, where you see those tests coming. Some of you have gotten through them and are ready to share what God did in your life. For me, I have never been the best test taker in the world. Tests are not something I've been good at. I struggled with in school, honestly. I struggled in school my whole life because I just didn't like it. I didn't want to be there, didn't want to be a part of it. And I know you try to get your students to do that when they come and ask me, did you like school? I'm honest and I tell them no. But I tell them they need to work hard. Math was always my hardest subject. I was never good at it. I didn't like it. I have ADHD, so having to focus really on anything is a challenge, but specifically when it's numbers, they run off the page and I can't pay attention and I don't know what's going on. So I was going into my junior year and I had a teacher by the name of Coach Fitz. He was actually the head basketball coach for our high school at Birdville. And man, he is a guy we grew up with. He is a very godly man. He wore God on his sleeve. He was proud of his faith. He let everybody know that he was a Christ follower. He would pray with us before practices and basketball games, like one of the most godly men I've ever met in my life. And I was in his math class. He was one of my coaches for upward basketball and everything. And so we go into math class, we sit down. It's halfway through the semester. We sit down, and all of a sudden there's a test on my desk. And I'm like, oh, crap. I haven't prepared, I haven't studied, I haven't paid attention. I honestly probably haven't even opened up my textbook the entire year. So I am completely ill-prepared for this test, and I sit down, I see the numbers on the page, and I have no clue. Like, there's not a chance in the world that I'm gonna pass this test, and I kind of do one of those Hail Mary prayers, like, God, please just help me pass this test. I'll do anything if you help me pass. And of course, I didn't think anything was gonna work, but I'm sitting there, and I seriously am trying to do as best as I can, but I don't know. I answered the multiple choice questions, which there was only about 2 of them. I got both of them wrong. And so I decided, you know what? If he is as godly of a man that he says he is, if he loves God and is proud of his faith as much as he says and promotes and tells the whole world, then he can't count this wrong. If I write, God is the answer on every single question. So I proceeded to write, God is the answer on every single question. Didn't show my work or anything like that. All I did was write, God is the answer. I turned in my test all proud. He is stunned because I'm the first one done, but he doesn't look at it yet. And about a week later, we get our test back. I'm kind of excited to see if it worked. I passed. The only 2 questions I got wrong were the multiple choice. I couldn't believe it. And he wrote something on the test, but he calls me up after class and he says, hey, I need to talk to you about your test. And I said, yeah, God is the answer, huh? And he's kind of chuckled and he said, he is. But the thing is, you still have to do the work. I'm not going to let you do this again. God just doesn't just give you things where he just hands you like if you've been praying and wanting a Ferrari for years and years and years, and he just goes, hey, here it is in the driveway. Like, he doesn't just hand things to you. He wants you to work. He puts opportunities and different things in your place. It's not just a free pass to say, oh, I trust God. I don't have to do anything. My marriage is falling apart. I don't have to work on it. I don't have to go to counseling. Finances are rough. Well, I'm going to go buy a new house. There's work that has to be done, and God provides you with those opportunities. And when you're saying, I trust in God, you're trusting that he is putting you in the right positions, trusting that he is taking you in the right directions. See, the thing is, we can trust God even when our faith is tested. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how difficult it gets, we can trust God even when our faith is tested. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do is because of that fear of the unknown. You don't know what's coming next. Especially when it comes to finances and you're like, man, I don't know how we're going to pay our bills next month. I don't know what's going to happen. We have all these things that are going on, medical bills coming and all this. You're like, how are we going to pay these? How's God going to provide in these situations? Thing is, I can't give you an answer for how he's going to provide, but I can tell you he has a plan. And it's hard to follow when you can't see the end of his plan, but I promise you the end of his plan is better than anything you can imagine. But you just have to be okay when it doesn't go exactly according to your plan. You know, we're looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they trusted him in some of the hardest times that you could imagine. In the first part of this passage we're about to read here in Daniel, I'm going to kind of set it up before we dive into it, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they lived in a kingdom. King Nebuchadnezzar told the entire kingdom, he made an entire gold statue and said, hey, look, you have to bow down and worship this statue. And so everybody in the land kind of disagrees. They kind of do it because they don't want to get in trouble, because the biggest thing he says is, if you do not bow down, you do not follow my direction, you do not listen to what I say, I'm going to throw you into a blazing furnace. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be turned into a KFC bucket. Like, it just doesn't sound fun to me. But they see this and they hear this, and they go at a certain time of day. They're all supposed to bow down, and the guards see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to do it. So they go up and tell King Nebuchadnezzar, and they tell him, saying, hey, look, these guys won't do it. They won't bow down. They won't listen to your decree. What should we do? And he says, hey, bring them to me. And that's where we pick up in Daniel 3, verses 16 through 18. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and we will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. They're refusing to do it. And I know for us to sit here and say, you know what, that's a great story. Like, I would do that too. If I was faced with this, I wouldn't bow down to any false idols. I wouldn't go do these things. Like, of course, I would stand strong in my faith. But let me ask you this. Where's your faith at today? When you're tested, when you have those struggles, when you have your marriage problems going on, when you have financial problems, you have temptations all over the place, you're being tempted in all these different directions, do you fail? Do you bow down? I know it seems different. You're like, well, we're not actually bowing down, but you are. You're giving into your temptations. You're not trusting God with those. You're saying, I can do it on my own. I don't need God's help. I can figure it out. But thing is, we need God. We have to trust God when we're tempted and trust his plan. We need to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you see that in verses 19. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. And the commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men were wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes. They were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent that the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. You know, for me, I'm seeing that if I'm those guys, those 3, they're being strong in their faith. They're honestly doing better than I think I could do, being faced with certain death, being thrown into a fire. They are standing there so strong in their faith. So we don't care what happens to us. God's got a plan greater than anything we can ever imagine. He will protect us, but even if he doesn't, he will help us through it. He will use our story. As they approach, the 2 guards die. They're not even in the fire. They're not even in the fire, and they pass away. They immediately just fall to the ground. But the hardest thing is that in those moments, that's when you feel like God doesn't care, that he's not there for you. Because you're struggling, there's all this stuff going on in life. You feel like every time you get through a test or a challenge, there's just another one. It's just over and over and over, and you're constantly getting hit, and you're getting punched, and it's like you just can't stand up. Yeah, so where's God? Thing is, he's there. And he's helping you through that. But sometimes we let our own ambitions to where he's trying to reach out a hand for you to help you, but we're missing it. You don't see it because your trust isn't with him. He's giving you opportunities through people and other things, but you miss it because you're not fully trusting in him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we continue, in verse 24, it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. The governors and the rulers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. He calls them out of the fire. They were telling them this whole time that God is going to protect them, that he's going to see them through it. They just had to trust him, and God did. He came through in a huge way. But that's not necessarily the part I want you to take from this. People noticed. People noticed what God did. The king saw him and immediately ordered them out of the fire to figure out what was going on. A lot of us are embarrassed and scared to talk about the test that we go through in our life, the test that we are about to face, or the things that have already happened that we've gone through. You don't want to talk about it, and you're embarrassed of them, you're ashamed. But the thing is, there are probably people sitting right next to you in this room right now that are going through the exact same thing that you're being tested in. Or maybe it's something where they're being tested or you're being tested, but they have been through it. You're like, I'm lost, I don't know what to do. I'm reaching out for help, but I don't see the answers. Maybe that answer's talking to that person, or being the person to give the guidance through the difficult situation. You don't notice how many people pay attention as you come through those tough moments. In 28, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except for their own. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Because they trusted God, because they stood up for their faith, because they said, look, we're not going to bow down to any false idols. We are trusting God with all our heart. They were saved. They changed an entire outcome of an entire nation to where they got to know who God is. So you say, my story isn't enough. I don't know what to talk about. My story can't help or talk to people. They can't help anybody else through it. You don't know who's paying attention. You don't know who's watching. They're in the midst of your challenges. See, God's not done. You don't know who it will impact. I didn't really fully understand that until I got into ministry a few years ago back at our Justin Northlake campus. And if you've been around, you've heard some of my story. I was not the best of kids, especially after high school. I was the guy that was out partying till 2, 3 in the morning, not making the best decisions. And honestly, most of the people that I went to high school and some college with are shocked that I'm in ministry today. But there was a guy I went to high school with named Trevor. I was a freshman when he was a senior. We played baseball together. We weren't friends. I wouldn't classify ourselves as friends. We really just kind of knew each other. And as I was at the Northlake campus, I essentially started posting a lot of stuff on Facebook of invite to church, come do this, come be a part of this, student ministry, all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden one day I get a message from him, and it said this. It said, what makes you so happy? And I was kind of taken back by it because I didn't really fully understand the question. Honestly, thought it was a spam message. But I texted him back and just asked him, hey, give me a call, because I wanted to figure out what was going on, what this meant. And he kind of let on that he and his wife were struggling. Marriage was very difficult. It was hard for them. They hadn't been married that long, but they'd already been tested in so many ways. Their finances weren't going well. They had just bought a house, and it was probably a little more than they were able to do. And then on top of it, they were struggling with having a child, having infertility issues. You know, it was hard for them. It was a hard portion of their life. And he's reaching out. He's like, I just don't know what else to do. I don't know where to go. But he's like, I just see the happiness that it looks like you have on Facebook. And anybody can look happy on Facebook. But it was the fact that it was through Christ. So he asked, what makes you so happy? I said, just come to church. I can't give you the answers. I have not gone through those things. I don't know the pain and the hurt and different things that you're feeling and what you're going through. But what I can tell you is you need to start trusting God. He came to church that next weekend, and shortly thereafter, he gave his life to Christ. His wife started coming to church with them. Job stuff started to kind of iron itself out. They started seeking help for marriage and counseling and different things, and they were able to have a child finally. And I'm not saying just because you do those things, every single prayer that you have is going to be answered in the exact way that you want it to, but God comes through in bigger ways. He makes an impact on his baseball team that he coaches and prays with them. And you've seen God do so much in his life. But it started simply just with trusting him. So you say, my story doesn't matter. It does. You don't know who's paying attention and who it can impact. See, the thing is, it's hard to see the end and what God will do when you're tested. But the thing is, when we're tested, we have to trust God. Well, we're about to answer that question here in a second over these next 3 points. But today, these points are very different than we've done before. Typically, I will read the point and I give you that fill in the blank spot. I am going to give you that first fill in the blank, but the second half of that point, that's for you to fill out. Because the thing is, I don't know what areas of your life you're being tested in. I don't know what struggles you were going through. I don't know what you've been through. I can't fill in that blank for you. So I'm going to give you time for each point to fill those in, to look at that, to pay attention to it, and write whatever you feel like you're being tested in, your struggles and things are. So the steps for trusting God in the midst of the fire is know that God can. Know that God can. For some of you, it may look like you need that God can heal your marriage, that God can help you in your finances, that God can provide a job for you, that God can help restore your family. Take a minute to write that down. For me, mine's a little bit different than a lot of us. Mine's just guide my family through the unknown. Guide my family through the unknown. We're about to enter so much change. And earlier I talked about, I feel like I'm on the brink of all these struggles, the hardships of being tested in our marriage, being tested in our finances. We're about to have our first baby, and I've never done it before. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know how it's going to affect our marriage or relationship or anything like that. I don't know how it's going to affect our finances. And so looking at that, it's scary to go into it just not knowing. Then as a student pastor, I've had the honor and opportunity to be with most of your kids. And as much as that is a blessing, it's also a curse. They're terrible. Being a student pastor, you'd think I would, a long time thought that it would prepare me for being a dad one day, but it's honestly made me more scared. Like, the things that your kids are exposed to are so much worse than what we had to deal with. We didn't have access to the internet like they did. We didn't have all these social media apps and the pressure of the world and having to fit into these certain kind of mold that society says you have to fit into. And notice that mold doesn't have your faith in it. How mean some girls and guys can be to each other, and just what that looks like, and just the stresses and the constant, like, how do I protect my daughter from that? How do I help her through those things, through the hard conversations? Like, what does that look like? How do I do that? It's terrifying. After all the conversation stuff that I have with the parents, like, I can never give them a right answer because it's different for everybody. So how do I protect my daughter from that? I have to trust God. Trust him that he will protect her and he will guide her and that he will help her through those times. The thing is, I have to believe that he will. I have to believe that he will. Believe that he will. For some of you, it's the finances, it's friendships, it's relationships with the people around you. For some of you, it could be the infertility. You're trying to have a family. It could be adoption. Everybody's is different, but you have to believe that he will. For me, it's provide for my marriage and family. You know, I have been saying this for a long time, and finances were a struggle for my wife and I when we first met. At that time, I was working very part-time at the church at our Justin Northlake campus. And when I mean very part-time, and wasn't paid much. Essentially, your high school students could work 10 hours a week and make almost double what I made as a student pastor. And so then my wife at the same time she was working a very minimum wage job. And so we're like, I don't know how we're going to be able to do this. I don't know how we're going to be able to live to afford it. But I kept telling myself I have to trust God through all these things. But it just made it so hard to believe that. I was like, well, we're about to get married. Where are we going to live? I don't want to live with my family. Most of you in this room know who my father is, and most of you do not want to live with him. He's a mess. I was thinking that in the constant stress and the struggle of, like, how am I going to provide for our family? Like, as the man of the house, like, how am I going to do this? Like, I already feel like I'm failing. We're not in marriage. Now, to make matters worse, I love my wife, but Target was my fiery furnace. I didn't know therapy was going to Target 3 times a day. Didn't know. And for my wife, that's what she would constantly do. And then also there's a Starbucks inside Target. So she also got a Starbucks 3 times a day. I didn't realize it until right about now that I married the most basic white girl in America. But my wife, like that was a talking point for us. We had to sit down and kind of go through our finances, and we had to kind of figure out those things. Because I'm like, look, we can't do this. We're not going to be able to pay bills. We're not going to be able to live on our own and have to set a budget and do all these things. And luckily now she is great with our money and all that and doesn't really go to Target very often at all anymore, even though somebody just gave us a gift card last service. But the whole reason we were able to get through that and through a lot of the struggles and things that we've had in our life is because trusted God. And he didn't come through and give it to us on the silver platter like, hey, you won the lottery, here's a check for $10,000, whatever it may be, here's a free house. He didn't do that. He provided an opportunity through the people that were around us. The people that were around us that helped guide us, that helped set budgets, helped us with financial things, helped us just do different things. I was able to get an opportunity to be able to come here and go full time at the church doing both Haslet and North Lake Student Ministries. I was never expecting that. I was never expecting to go into ministry, but God has come through in our lives in bigger ways than I can ever imagine. And we're still on the brink of new challenges and new things with us looking to start a campus in Decatur. My wife and I going out there here and probably within the next few months. It's scary, a new baby, a new campus. Leaving the people that have been here and supported us for years. But God has a plan. He always comes through. But let me ask you this. And I want you to pause for a minute and think about this. When you say you trust God and that God always comes through, can you believe in him and trust in him? Can you believe that he can and believe that he will when he doesn't? Can you trust him even when he doesn't? When he doesn't come through in the way that you want it to go to. Like, think about that picture perfect life, the thing that you want to have, that you want all your problems and fears and worries to be gone. You want it to end up exactly like this. Can you trust him even if it doesn't work out the exact way that you want it to? If it wasn't a part of your plan, but it was a part of his, can you still trust him? Thing is, you have to remember that God's plan is the right plan. God's plan is the right plan. You see it in Romans 8:28, it says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. Notice that he works for the good of those who love him. He wants to help you. He wants to guide you. He wants to help you through your struggles and your temptations, but a lot of times our heart is blocked off to it till we don't see the opportunities that God is doing in our lives, or we shut him out because it doesn't work out the exact way that we want it to. I'll be honest with you. A year and a half ago, I was so angry. Most of you know the story of my brother who he struggled with drug and alcohol addiction for years, 10 plus years. It started while he was in middle school. It continued to get worse and worse and worse, where he was in and out of jail. He was stealing things. He went to different rehab facilities. It was just a spiral thing. And during this whole time, I'm praying and asking God to save him from his addictions, to help him through it, to get him through these hard times, these challenges, like just bring us together as a family again and heal him. Prayed for years. February 12th of last year, John passed away to an overdose. I was so angry and frustrated because that's not what I prayed for. I didn't pray for you to take my brother from me. I didn't pray to feel this pain and the hurt. What I wanted you to do is heal him. I wanted you to take care of him, our family, bring our family back together. He didn't do that. But the thing is, he did. He healed John, not in the way that I wanted, but he knew that John couldn't beat this addiction, that there was no way while he was here on earth that he was going to do that, so he chose to save him from it, to save him from himself. From John's story, we've seen so much life change. We've seen so many people come to know God through his story. We've seen so many people come to get help that are struggling with addictions, that have reached out and said, hey, I don't know what to do. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know where to go. I just need help. You've seen people come to Jesus through that. You've seen families ask for help because their son or their daughter or their family members are going through the same things where they're seeking help. You've seen people turn their life around where they say, I can't be addicted anymore. I don't want to end up like that. I was so angry and frustrated for so many years. The fact that God took or not years, but for months that God took my brother away from me. It's not what I prayed for. It's not what I asked. I don't know how I can trust you through this. But what God did is he came through so much bigger in the end. As a church, it's helped change our culture to where now, as we're launching a my FOTP 30 for our 30-year anniversary later this year, we have an entire mental health initiative to provide counseling, to seek help and resource for people that are struggling with mental health. I don't know if that would have happened if John didn't pass. The thing is, God works in so much better ways than I can imagine. His story is not how I wanted it to end. But the fact that I lost a brother here on earth, I gained so many brothers and sisters in Christ. I know one day when I go to heaven, I get to see him again. He won't just be standing there. There will be hundreds of people standing around him because of his story. And I wouldn't change that for the world. Our next step is, what is your fiery furnace? What is the thing that you're being tested with, that you're facing, that you're struggling with? And commit to pray this. Commit to God this prayer. God, I know you love me. I believe you can take this from me, and I trust you no matter what. For some of us, that doesn't just need to be, we're saying it today. It needs to be a daily prayer. Constantly remind yourself to trust God. Know that he loves you and he's going to see you through it, even if it doesn't work out like you planned. But in the end, it's going to be better than anything you could ever imagine. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for today. I want to thank you for allowing us to be here, to love you, to grow closer to you, to continue to worship you. God, I pray that we're able to put our trust and our faith in you no matter how hard it gets and how challenging it gets. And even in the moments where it doesn't seem like it's going to work out or it's not working out the way we want, that you know you have a greater plan for our lives. God, and I do want to give people in this room the opportunity to where if they've never taken that next step, they've never put their trust and faith in God, they've never accepted Jesus in their lives, that they're able to do that today. And if that's you and you're ready to do that, just repeat silently in your head with me. Just pray, say, God, I know I'm a sinner. I know I'm not perfect and I never will be. And I know you are the only perfect person. God, I want to commit my life to you. I want to love you, and I want to put my trust in you. I want to turn over my fears and worries and trust you with my life. God, I want to accept you into my heart and commit to lead my family, the people around us, to know who you are. God, I just want to thank you for everything you're doing. And if there's anybody in the room that said that prayer, if they write that on that connection card, that they come talk to Chuck or I, they come seek help, and that they know the love that you truly have for them. God, I want to thank you for everything you're doing. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen.